So that is where we have got to start taking responsibility, ultimately, facing ourselves first, looking inside. Because regardless of the fact that other people have done things that have impacted you, you are the only one who can change that. So the question to ask is, what am I believing about myself that I think I need more than what I have in my life to be okay? Because we have to realize that anytime we're hoping, wishing, longing, what we're really saying to ourselves is, I'm not enough. I'm not enough. I'm not enough. And so that is why we're miserable. That's why we aren't happy. So that one leads right into our next factor, which is emotional vulnerability. The emotional part is kind of redundant, but I needed an E to spell my word. So, rather than understanding our fears, too often we hide from them and just kind of hope they're going to go away, right? Like an ostrich sticking its head in the sand. I don't want to feel that uncomfortable feeling. I don't want to look at it, so I'm just going to pretend it's not there. Doesn't work so well. And those emotions, those fears, those anxieties, those uncomfortable feelings, they have so much power. And they have power to teach us and power to transform our lives if we're actually willing to start listening to them and allowing them instead of just kind of being pushed around by them. So bottom line is this means we have to start by feeling our feelings instead of doing all this crazy stuff that we do to try to not feel. And what we don't realize when we're busy trying to not feel is that when you try and numb yourself, you numb yourself entirely. You can't selectively numb your life experience. You can't do it. You can't say, I don't want to feel sad. I don't want to feel angry ever. I don't want to feel scared ever, but I do want to feel joyful, and I do want to feel happy, and I do want to feel alive. You can't do that. Because all of those feelings use exactly the same network in our body. Anger, passion, sadness, joy, fear, excitement. They use the same network. So when you try to cut off your feeling, you are cutting yourself off from all the good stuff as well. So we have to let ourselves feel those feelings, in a way get in touch with what's going on in our basement, and then let ourselves be vulnerable where we are vulnerable. Actually, instead of hiding, pretending, defending, strategizing, using all our porch techniques that we learned, we have to actually let ourselves be vulnerable where we are vulnerable. Because the fears that we have are not true. But we're never going to realize that as long as we're hiding them away. Evolution takes place on the point of contact with another human being. If you think about how you feel when somebody is being brave enough to be vulnerable in front of you, how do you feel when someone's legitimately vulnerable with you? Sick. That's not the word. That's not the... Safe! I thought you said sick. It's not where I was going with that. Safe. And your heart opens, doesn't it? Your heart opens. That's a human response to vulnerability. And there is so much power in that. Vulnerability is connective. And that's why vulnerability is more likely to work than any of the strategies that we want to employ, any of the masks we put on, any of the controlling stuff that we do. Vulnerability invites connection. And the key is ultimately to reveal our vulnerability in a responsible way. Because I think in this culture we also will often confuse victim with vulnerability. And victim sends messages, look what you've done to me. You hurt me. And that I could spend a whole hour talking about, but I'm not going to. Next, acceptance. Stop arguing with your own life circumstances. How much time do you spend arguing about how things should be? or upset because they are the way they are. Whatever is happening is what is happening, and it is a waste of energy to argue about it inside of yourself. It is a waste of energy. And practicing acceptance is the quickest way that you're going to get yourself unstuck when you feel stuck in your life. I guarantee it. Sometimes what's happening is hard. And when it's hard, the bravest thing we can do is let ourselves actually fall into that experience. And let ourselves feel it. And let ourselves move through it on an emotional level. I started my career more than 20 years ago at a cancer clinic. And people's responses to hearing the news that they or a loved one has been diagnosed with cancer is often, "Why me?" Right? Which is a pretty understandable human response to that kind of scary news. Because when people hear cancer, they think, "I'm dying," which is not true anymore. However, that's where our brains go. Cancer, death. Scary business, why me? A woman named Leslie was diagnosed with breast cancer when she was in her 30s, and she had 2 kids, and she had lost her husband a couple of years before. And when asked if she ever asked that question, "Why me?" she said, "At first I did, and then I figured, why not me? Why not me? This is the role that I've been given to play, and I'm going to do it as gracefully and as consciously as I possibly can." The best stories are not stories that say, once upon a time they lived happily ever after. The best stories, the best feature films have challenges, have difficulties, have all kinds of messy human things in the middle of them. And that, to be able to fall in love with your own story means learning how to see the beauty even in the middle of really hard, challenging circumstances. And this one is really hitting home for me these days. Dwayne and I are both surrounded by people who have got some really serious challenges happening in their lives right now. Relationships breaking up, affairs coming to light, a couple of people actually dying at the moment, one who's a very close friend of ours in Sweden. And that, when we think about life as a game that we have to win, like if the object of the game is not to face the same difficulties that our neighbors are facing, we're never going to be able to find happiness. We're always going to be in a state of anxiety. Every single one of us are going to go through difficulty at some point in our lives. These things are predictable, not necessarily about when, but for sure somebody close to you is going to die. You're going to go through challenges. You're going to go through difficulties. And when we can actually connect to our stories in a different way, we can experience the beauty even in the middle of those challenges. This is a beautiful quote from Carl Rodgers, who says, "The curious paradox is that when I accept myself just as I am, then I can change." So just as our lives are a mixed bag, so are we. We are all a mix of strength and weakness and vulnerability and talent. None of us is perfect. And just as we physically look differently on an emotional, psychological level, it's like we all have a different thumbprint. We're not all meant to be perfect little pictures that we're trying to be so hard. And there's beauty in that mixed bag. When the Navajo weave a blanket, they deliberately weave a flaw into it. Deliberately. Because they believe that lets the spirit of the blanket roam. And I think that's a beautiful, gorgeous metaphor. Like there's something in these flaws and in these difficulties that's actually essential in terms of our spirit roaming, in terms of our growth and our development as human beings. If we actually manage to create our lives where there's never any difficulty and everything is always perfect, we would end up being narcissists. So when we're brave enough to reveal those flaws, to reveal our vulnerability, and the experience of connection is the correction to those crazy things that we have made up about ourselves. So, all of these things that happened, it is not the events themselves that cause the suffering. It is the meaning that we have attached to the events and the meaning that we are now carrying into our future and projecting all over everything.